You thought you knew Clint Eastwood, the cool, unshakable icon. You were dead wrong. At 95, the legend is finally tearing off the mask, and what's underneath is darker than anyone could have ever dreamed. He's finally calling out the 6 stars who twisted the knife when his back was turned. These were the people who soaked up his spotlight, who shared his glory, only to betray him in the most gut-wrenching way. And when you hear who they are, it'll all make terrifying sense why Clint Eastwood's memory is long and his forgiveness is non-existent. Kicking things off, number 1, Leonardo DiCaprio, Hollywood's golden boy who committed the one sin Clint would never forgive. What on earth could possibly force a legend like Clint Eastwood to storm off his own set? The answer? In 2 words, Leonardo DiCaprio. Back in 2010, when J. Edgar began filming, it was billed as the ultimate dream team. Hollywood's iciest director meets its most fiery actor. But behind the scenes, insiders whispered it was a total nightmare right from day one. DiCaprio rolled in, armed with mountains of notes, endless pages of research, even his own marked-up FBI files. The crew watched as Clint's legendary patience just vanished into thin air. He was acting like a detective trying to crack a case. Clint supposedly shot back with a dry joke, "And I'm not the one on trial." But don't let the humor fool you underneath. A storm of irritation was brewing, and then it finally exploded. It was the huge emotional breakdown scene. Leo absolutely crushed it on the very first take. It was raw, it was real, it was utterly flawless. The entire set went silent. Clint just whispered, "Perfect. Cut." But Leo, unbelievably, wanted another take, and then another. By the 6th time, Clint had completely abandoned his director's chair. He was just leaning against the craft services table, a coffee cup in his hand, and a face like granite. Someone dared to ask if he was all right. He just grumbled, "He's still digging for something I already found." When the movie finally wrapped, there wasn't a party, just a chilling silence, Clint's signature silence. And from that day on, every casting meeting told the same story. Anytime DiCaprio's name came up, Clint would just give a slow shake of his head. "Great actor," he'd mutter, "but he's not my kind of guy." They have never worked together again. Never even shared a stage. Not a single word has passed between them. Leo eventually got his Oscar years later, but he never, ever got another call from Clint Eastwood. Because in Clint's world, perfection isn't about endless second chances. It's about nailing it the first time and not wasting a single precious second. Number 2. Michael Moore, the one man who dared to push Clint Eastwood over the edge. The second Michael Moore compared Clint's masterpiece, American Sniper, to Nazi propaganda. He basically signed his own Hollywood death warrant. Clint didn't scream, he didn't yell, he just iced him out of his life, permanently. But this wasn't their first rodeo. The bad blood had been simmering for years, all the way back to 2005, when Eastwood took the stage at the National Board of Review Awards and let out a low growl. "If Michael Moore ever darkens my doorstep with a camera, I'll kill him." The audience let out a nervous chuckle, but Clint's face was stone. He wasn't laughing. He just stared dead ahead and walked right off that stage. That wasn't a punchline, people. That was a declaration of war. To really get this epic feud, you have to understand the code Clint lives by. Ironclad discipline, silent service, and old-school honor. To him, Moore's films, especially Fahrenheit 9/11, were nothing but cheap political stunts dressed up as art. He looks at soldiers and sees pawns. I look at them and see heroes. Eastwood exploded in a rare moment of anger to a close friend. This was about one thing: respect. Then, nearly a decade later, Moore just couldn't help himself. He went online and publicly mocked American Sniper, writing that it reminded him of that Nazi propaganda film from Inglourious Basterds. Moore tried to play it off as a joke, but sources close to Clint said he was absolutely furious. As one of his oldest collaborators put it, Clint doesn't just remember insults, he erases the person who said them, and that's precisely what happened. From the moment that tweet went live, Michael Moore ceased to exist in Clint Eastwood's universe. Eastwood has worked with people from all across the political spectrum, liberals and conservatives alike, but he has one unbreakable rule: you do not mock American soldiers. In Clint's eyes, Moore didn't just cross that line, he spit on it. Even today, if you dare to bring up Michael Moore's name around Clint, the entire conversation just dies. Next up, number 3, Barbra Streisand, the diva perfectionist who went head-to-head with the cowboy. Even after a staggering 9 decades in Hollywood, there's one name that can still make Clint Eastwood's jaw clench in pure frustration: Barbra Streisand. She's the one who burrowed so deep under his skin that to this day, he won't even utter her name. And their epic clash went down as one of Hollywood's most bitter, ice-cold feuds. It all exploded back in the early 1980s, when these two titans were shifting from movie stars to shot callers. And let me tell you, Streisand was an absolute control freak. We're talking 40, 50, sometimes even a mind-blowing 60 takes just to capture a single expression. Clint? He was the polar opposite, 2 takes, max, and then it was time to move on. He famously declared, "If it's not real the first time, it's not worth filming." In his mind, Barbra was the poster child for everything that had gone rotten in the new Hollywood. Obsessive control, blinding vanity, and just endless, agonizing overthinking. By the early 90s, their clashing styles had festered into pure, undisguised contempt for each other. And when The Prince of Tides shockingly missed a Best Director nod for Streisand in 1992, Eastwood was reportedly overheard whispering to a buddy, maybe if she could actually make a decision, she'd managed to finish more than 3 movies in 15 years. That brutal comment ripped through the industry like wildfire. Then came the ultimate showdown, The Bridges of Madison County, the project that absolutely shattered whatever tiny shred of peace was left between them. Streisand had been attached to direct it for what felt like an eternity, but she backed out after years of waffling. That's when Eastwood swooped in like a hawk, completely overhauled the script, and delivered this stunning, heart-wrenching masterpiece. It snagged Meryl Streep an Oscar nomination and gave Clint the ultimate silent revenge. And since that moment, they've treated each other like the plague, a total Hollywood freeze-out. To Clint, she was the living, breathing embodiment of everything he hated about making movies: crippling hesitation, suffocating control, and the absolute murder of gut instinct. In his world, you pull the trigger once, you don't unload the whole clip 50 times. Coming in at number 4, Tommy Lee Jones, the one raging bull that even Clint couldn't tame. The very first day Tommy Lee Jones set foot on the set of In the Line of Fire back in 1993, Clint Eastwood allegedly leaned over to a crew guy and grumbled, "2 bulls in 1 pen, this is gonna get ugly." And boy, was he right. At first, everyone was buzzing, thinking they'd be a dream team. But the second the cameras weren't rolling, it was an all-out war. Jones wasn't some actor who'd just take quiet notes, he barked. He argued, he rewrote lines on the spot, and he'd keep going full throttle long after anyone yelled, "Cut!" Clint, who famously ran his sets with a cool, quiet efficiency, just stared on in absolute astonishment. One of the set techs later dished, the guy would stay completely in character between takes. Clint would just give him this look, like, "What on earth are you doing?" And all that simmering tension finally boiled over during this insane confrontation scene. Jones was looming over Clint, completely lost in the role, spitting out every line like pure poison. The director screamed, "Cut!" But Jones just kept right on going, locking his intense gaze right on Eastwood. The entire crew went dead silent. After a pause that felt like an eternity, Clint turned and whispered to his assistant, "Life's way too short for this kind of theater." And with that, he just turned around and walked right off the set. From that exact moment, the die was cast. Whenever casting directors would later bring up Jones for one of Eastwood's movies, Clint would shut it down instantly. "Oh, he's a fantastic actor," he'd say, "but we just don't speak the same language, and we all know what that really means. Never again." They have never, ever worked together since. Never shared a stage, and they don't even breathe each other's names in interviews. In Clint Eastwood's world, there's only room for one alpha dog, and he's the one who yells, "Cut." And now for number 5, Richard Burton, the legendary boozer who pushed Clint's legendary patience to its absolute breaking point. Look, Clint Eastwood is known for being cool as a cucumber, but Richard Burton damn near made him completely blow his top. On the 1968 set of Where Eagles Dare, the bad blood wasn't about egos or star power. It was all about one man's catastrophic lack of professionalism. Burton would roll in late, mumbling his lines, often reeking of last night's party. And Clint, who was always suited up and ready to go before sunrise, would just have to stand there and watch him absolutely butcher take after agonizing take. A crew member later swore you could literally watch the respect just drain right out of Clint's face, like sand through an hourglass. Burton was trapped in the absolute chaos of his marriage to Elizabeth Taylor, and it felt like every single night ended at the bottom of a bottle. And every morning, the poor crew paid the price. Clint never screamed, never lectured. He just waited, stone, cold, silent, and his disgust grew with every passing second. After Burton absolutely butchered the same line for the 10th agonizing time, Clint supposedly hissed, "I'm getting paid by the picture, not by the hour." The crew let out a nervous laugh, but Burton's face was grim. The message hit its mark. But the final, unforgivable blow came when Burton was overheard calling the movie nothing more than a paycheck job to Eastwood. That wasn't just an insult, it was a dagger to the heart. Clint believed every film deserved your soul, even a popcorn action flick. Years later, when a reporter dared to ask about Burton, Clint didn't even bother to be polite, saying, "Talented guy, wasted talent." That's all he said, because that's all that needed to be said. The film was a smash hit, but their professional relationship was buried right there on that set. Clint never worked with him again, never spoke of him again. For a man who believes silence is the most brutal weapon of all. Burton's fate was sealed. That's a line you just don't cross. Number 6. Jean Seberg, the woman who finally broke Clint's ironclad patience. Clint Eastwood will not discuss Paint Your Wagon ever again, and if you want to know the reason, it's one name, Jean Seberg. She wasn't just his co-star in the 1969 musical, she was the reason. He swore on his career he'd never mix pity with professionalism again. Seberg was a fragile, unpredictable mess, and was already being watched by the FBI for her fiery political activism. On set, her emotions were a complete disaster. One day, she'd have the whole crew wrapped around her little finger with a smile. The next, she'd barricade herself in her trailer for hours. Clint was her polar opposite, a machine of focus, always on time, and allergic to that kind of drama. By week 3, he was absolutely done. She'd stop dead in the middle of a scene to ask about her motivation, a script supervisor remembered. Clint would just stare a hole into the floor, waiting for her to be done. You could literally see him dying a little bit inside. The real nuclear fallout came later when Paint Your Wagon was a colossal bomb. Seberg ran to the press, claiming that Clint's wooden performance was what sank the entire movie. For Clint, that was the most disgusting betrayal imaginable, trashing a colleague in public after he'd spent months desperately trying to hold the whole crumbling production together. From that exact moment, she was erased. He never uttered her name again. If anyone dared to bring her up, he'd cut them off, light a cigar, and walk away. Years later, when the tragic news of Seberg's death broke in 1979, Clint was a vault of silence. Friends say he looked genuinely devastated, but he never, ever softened his stance. "Some people aren't cut out for the work," he once said in a low voice, "and I don't need to deal with it twice." That is the absolute closest he has ever come to forgiveness. So, what's the final call? Was Clint Eastwood completely right to just cut them out of his life? Or did his cold, hard silence go way too far? Tell us exactly what you believe in the comments below, and you better subscribe for more of the secret Hollywood stories that were never supposed to see the light of day.